Welcome to the Crazy Alchemist podcast, where alchemy, occultism, and strange history come alive.
The full title is Bardo Thodol, which translates as Liberation Through Hearing During the Intermediate State. The English name, Tibetan Book of the Dead, was invented in 1927 by an American with theosophical leanings who wanted a title that would sell. It worked. The book has never gone out of print. But the title is misleading. The Egyptian Book of the Dead is a collection of spells, passwords for getting past underworld gatekeepers, instructions the dead person carries into the tomb. The Bardo Thodol works the other way around. It is a set of instructions the living read aloud to the dying, and then to the corpse, and then to the empty room where the corpse used to be, for 49 days. The premise is simple and enormous. Consciousness does not end at the moment of death. It enters a series of intermediate states called the bardos, where it encounters visions of overwhelming intensity. Some are peaceful, some are terrifying. All of them are projections of the dying person's own mind. If the person recognizes this, they are liberated. If they do not, they are reborn. For the past century, an unlikely procession of Western translators, psychologists, neuroscientists, and psychedelic researchers has been trying to figure out why this text seems to describe experiences that have nothing to do with Tibetan Buddhism. According to tradition, the Bardo Thodol was composed in the 8th century by Padmasambhava, the Indian tantric master who brought Vajrayana Buddhism to Tibet. His principal student, Yeshe Sogyal, wrote down the teachings. Then they hid the text. This was not unusual. The Terma tradition held that certain teachings were too advanced for the present age. Masters concealed them in rocks and lakes, and sometimes in the fabric of consciousness itself, to be rediscovered when the time was right. In the 14th century, a Tibetan named Karma Lingpa recovered the Bardo Thodol from the Gampo Hills in central Tibet. Modern scholarship complicates this origin story. Most Western academics date the text to the 14th century, treating it as Karma Lingpa's composition rather than Padmasambhava's. But the Dunhuang manuscripts, a cache of roughly 40,000 documents sealed in a cave near the Silk Road and discovered in 1900, provide a partial counterargument. At least one Tibetan manuscript from that collection corresponds to material found in the Bardo tradition, and it predates Karma Lingpa by roughly 2 centuries. The Bardo Thodol divides the after-death experience into 3 phases. Each offers a different kind of danger and a different chance at liberation. The first is the Chikai Bardo, which begins at the last breath. Consciousness separates from the body and encounters what the text calls the clear light of reality. If the dying person recognizes the light as a projection of their own fundamental awareness, liberation is immediate. No rebirth, no further journey. The text is blunt about how rarely this happens. Recognition requires years of meditation practice. For most people, the clear light appears and they flinch from it. It is too bright, too direct. They turn away. The second is the Chonyad Bardo, lasting approximately 14 days. During the first 7, consciousness encounters peaceful deities, serene figures radiating colored lights of extraordinary beauty. During the second 7, the same deities return in their wrathful forms, fanged, multi-armed, surrounded by flames, wearing crowns of skulls. Here, the text makes its most radical claim. The peaceful and wrathful deities are the same beings. They are not external. They are projections of the dead person's own psychological patterns. The wrathful forms are not punishments. They are the same compassionate energy expressed through a consciousness that is too frightened to recognize compassion in its gentle form. The third is the Sidpa Bardo, covering the final 21 days before rebirth. Karmic patterns pull the consciousness toward a new incarnation. The text describes scenes of couples in union, representing the moment of conception. The consciousness, drawn by desire or revulsion, enters a womb and is reborn. 49 days in total, but the Bardo Thodol emphasizes that these are not fixed durations. Liberation can happen at any point. It arrived in the English-speaking world through one of the stranger collaborations in translation history. Kazi Dawa Samdup was a school teacher in Gangtok, Sikkim, who also served as an interpreter for the British colonial administration. In the early 20s, he produced an English translation. He died in 1922, 5 years before the translation was published. Walter Evans Wentz, an American from Trenton, New Jersey, who had joined the Theosophical Society as a young man, acquired Dawa Samdup's translation, edited it, added commentary drawn from Theosophy, and published it through Oxford University Press in 1927. The title was his invention. The book became one of the most widely read texts on Eastern religion in English. It also introduced a problem that has persisted for a century. Evans Wentz's commentary filtered the text through a theosophical lens that had nothing to do with Tibetan Buddhism. Carl Jung wrote a psychological commentary for the 1953 edition. He read the Bardo Thodol as a map of the unconscious. The peaceful deities were archetypes, universal patterns embedded in the collective unconscious. The wrathful deities were the same archetypes when consciousness could not accept them in their benign form. Jung did not reduce the text to neurology. He did not claim the bardos were just the brain shutting down. He treated the visions as real psychological events with their own structure and logic, regardless of whether a literal afterlife existed. In 1964, Timothy Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert published The Psychedelic Experience, a manual based on the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It mapped the 3 bardos onto the 3 phases of an LSD trip. The Chikai Bardo became the initial ego dissolution. The Chonyad Bardo became the hallucinatory middle phase, filled with visions that could be ecstatic or terrifying. The Sidpa Bardo became the gradual return to ordinary identity. The mapping was not subtle. Leary was not a subtle person, but the parallel he drew was more precise than his critics acknowledged. The Bardo Thodol describes a consciousness moving through stages of dissolution and reformation, encountering projections of its own mental habits. LSD does something similar. Between 1990 and 1995, a psychiatrist named Rick Strassman conducted the first government-approved clinical research on DMT at the University of New Mexico. He injected 60 volunteers with one of the most powerful psychedelics known to chemistry. The parallels with the Bardo Thodol were striking. Volunteers described a blinding white light at the onset, dissolution of the sense of self, encounters with non-human entities that seemed autonomous and intelligent, and a feeling of moving through distinct realms or stages. Strassman proposed that DMT, which occurs naturally in the human body, might be released by the pineal gland at the moment of death. The pharmacologist David Nichols published a rigorous critique in 2018. The adult pineal gland weighs less than 0.2 grams. A psychoactive dose of DMT requires roughly 25 milligrams. That is an 800-fold gap in production capacity. The pineal gland theory, as popularly presented, does not hold up. What does hold up is the phenomenological overlap. In 2019, a team at Imperial College London administered DMT to 13 volunteers in a placebo-controlled study. DMT produced significant increases in every feature associated with near-death experiences: the sensation of leaving the body, entering another realm, encountering a bright light, and communicating with non-human presences. The materialist reading says the Bardo Thodol is a cultural artifact. Its descriptions correspond to known neurological phenomena during the dying process. The resemblance between Bardo visions and DMT experiences proves the point. Both are brain events. The other reading says convergence across unrelated contexts is worth paying attention to. Near-death experience research conducted by people with no knowledge of Tibetan Buddhism produced the same sequence independently. Strassman's subjects who were not dying and were not Buddhists reported the same sequence. Cortical disinhibition is random. This is ordered. The Bardo Thodol itself offers a third position. The visions are neither external beings nor random neural firing. They are the natural display of mind when mind is no longer constrained by a body. Tibetan funerary practice takes this literally. If consciousness departs the body at death, the body is an empty vessel. Sky burial involves carrying the corpse to a high, flat rock, cutting it into pieces, and offering it to vultures. A specialist called a Rogyapa performs the dismemberment. The bones are ground with barley flour and mixed with butter. The entire body is consumed. The Egyptians preserved the body because they believed the spiritual double needed a physical home to return to. The Tibetans needed the body gone because consciousness had already moved on. The Bardo Thodol was hidden once in the 8th century and found in the 14th. It was hidden again behind the Tibetan language and the remoteness of Himalayan monasteries until Evans Wentz brought it west in 1927. Jung used it, Leary repurposed it. Strassman's volunteers, who had never read it, described what it describes. Every generation that encounters the text brings its own framework: theosophy, Jungian psychology, psychedelic pharmacology, neuroscience. Each framework explains part of it. None of them explain the whole thing. The Tibetans would say this is because frameworks are the problem. The point of the Bardo Thodol is to see without one. If you enjoyed this journey through the Bardo, consider subscribing. Leave a comment telling us which reading makes the most sense to you, and check the link in the description for the full article with sources.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to visit crazyalchemist.com for more intriguing content and follow Crazy Alchemist on Instagram and Facebook to stay connected.